Our second style is cinematic and moody, and in today's lesson, we're going to take a look at 3 examples. So let's get started. Now, cinematic is a very generic term. Basically, it refers to any color grading that is close to what we see in cinema, but it really depends on the tone of the movie, the story, and it's a lot more specified than what I'm calling it here. So for me, I'm going to be combining my cinematic style with Moody clips, which I will show you guys in a second what that looks like. So when we refer to a color grading as cinematic, we just mean that it's really detailed and it's something we see often in cinema. And based on what's happening in your short film, in your video, then you would be choosing the right colors and the right lighting, which we already know how to do. We know what each color means, and we know the different moods that we can create with color combinations and light. Let's begin with our first example. It's a really simple landscape shot of the shore. I'm going to transform this ordinary looking landscape into something more moody. Now, moody on its own just refers to anything that's really dark and at the same time has really rich colors, especially when it comes to colder colors like blue, green, purple, and we're kind of taking away from the warm colors and intensifying the colder colors. Let's make our sequence and begin color grading. Let's go to our Lumetri Full workspace, which I made myself. We already know how to do that. So in basic correction, we want to darken everything. So exposure, bring that down. More contrast, that's really important. Highlights, we can reduce that. Darken those shadows. Add to those whites, so we get pure whites. And darken those blacks. For temperature, we want a colder temperature and a green tint. As for saturation, I can just bring it down by like 8 points. So far, we kind of darkened and made the video colder. So this is what we did so far. Now go to the creative section and decrease the vibrance. We can reduce the saturation too. The most important part is the water here, so the rocks don't need to be that saturated. Head down to curves, create your S-curve. Then we can go into color wheels and begin setting colors for the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Shadows, we want those to be cold, so bring it down towards the blue side. Midtones, I'm going to bring it to the green side to get that moody look. An example of moody in this sense would be like Harry Potter. So think of that movie when you're going forward. You can also bring up a picture so you know how far you need to go with the shadows and how much of the colors you need. As for highlights, I'm going to go with a slight purple. Just a tiny bit. So now with the color wheels, we made this even colder and it's looking pretty good. Now for the HSL secondary, I'm going to use it to change the hue of my water. This is of course optional, but it's pretty common in Moody clips. So you can just try it out. I'm going to bring in the lighter blue and then work with the different sliders. Come down here and change this towards like a cyan color or a green color. You just want a really rich watercolor for this video. I'm going to stick with this. And I'm sure you can see, let me zoom in here. So as you can see, we took the water from this blue and added some green to it to get this new color. Work with your new color by working with the following sliders. Gonna add some green tint, blue temperature, and saturate it further. Bring this up, and that's looking pretty good. And then just desaturate it so it doesn't look that vibrant, because this is, after all, a Moody style. Once you're done with the HSL secondary, you can go back to curves and adjust the points that you got. You can also head over to the different channels and work with adding blue to the highlights, removing blue, and so on forth. So I'm done with my first look. This is before. Everything is vibrant, there's a warm light from the sun, and we just took that. Instead, we made it look like a scene from a very serious movie. So that's our first example. Let's move on to the second example. Go back to your project panel, which you can bring in right here. And I will make another sequence from my second clip. Now I have this video that we used before, and this is actually perfect for a moody scene. Maybe it's a flashback from the villain, and we're trying to make this look like a thriller film. Go back in here. In this video, we have a human subject, so we need to be careful with the different sliders. We don't want her skin to be green as well. So it's important to work with the sliders really carefully. Contrast, bring those highlights down, darken those shadows, increase the whites, and darken the blacks. Creative tab, we want a little less vibrance and a decrease from the saturation. Curves, make a simple S-curve, again adding contrast to the entire video. If your video turned out to be too blue, you can head over to the blue channel and reduce that from the highlights, or add it in my case. If you pull the sliders down, you're going to get more yellow into the picture. So for me, I want some blue in the highlights, but a little bit of a green in the shadows, because the shadows are the trees. And I want to get this icy, moody look. Be very careful with the sliders so you don't accidentally make her skin tone blue. If you go in the hue saturation curves, which is within the curves panel, you have the option to change the hue of the colors that you can pick. So we have all these different channels that you can work with. Each of them have a dropper so you can select the color and just work with the way it looks. So I will just sample this area of her forehead. Remember that you do not want to target the shadows or the highlights. Somewhere pretty average. Then I'm just going to grab the last point, bring it over to the colder side. And now I can get this like red-green look. Or go below and make it look more icy. Maybe zoom out. So you can either get something like this or like this. The first option is better since we have some reds. You can choose any other color, of course, but I will stick with this look that we have right now. Go on the other side and you can work with adding more colors. I'm gonna lift it towards the top. Now for the warmth, which is her skin, the flower thing, and the trees. Now in the red section, you can either make it more red, like purplish, or just bring it down to the colder tones. So I will actually make mine a little bit more red since I wanted to stand out among all of these green. So something like this. And so far it's looking pretty different. This was before, this is after. So these guys are really helpful. Work around with them and see what works best for you. I'm going to sample the skin again and do something with blumetry. make your skin a little bit more pale by adding some light to it. And as for the sky, I want to bring it down. So the most vibrant thing is the character. So this is my final look. I'm going to close this off. Before, after. In the color wheels, you can add some additional colors. I'm going to add a little bit more of a green to the shadows, which is the trees mostly. Blue to the midtones. And a little bit of a purple to the highlights. Let's work that out. There we go. So this is gonna just finalize your coloring. I took it away from the screen and made it more blue. Once you're done with your coloring, you can always go back in basic correction, maybe darken some things, make them lighter, add some contrast, and just make this perfect. So there is our character, looking good. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like when we made it cinematic and moody. So that's our second example. Let's go over here and take a look at our third one. So for the third example, we have a really simple landscape, but again, we got some water and the sky, which is perfect because we want to center colder tones in these moody styles. So let's go right here, Lumetri color, and begin fixing this video. Again, we have a subject, so you don't want to be too liberal with these sliders. You don't want the subject to be mixed in with all the other elements. So be careful with each of these sliders. Begin with RGB curve. Make your S-curve the way you want it. Grab your dropper tool, select the color that you want, of course choosing the right channel. So for example, if you want to change the hue and the saturation of that color, then you would want to use the first channel. So pay attention to which channel you're using so you don't get a weird result. So after working with the hue saturation curves and the RGB curves, I now have this result. Before, after. Let's close that off and head down to color wheels where we can just add a little bit more tint to whichever areas that need it. Then go back to the basic correction and work with the sliders one more time. There we go. Once you're finished, we can now go ahead and maybe add some vignette just to center things around the subject. So we're done with this. This was before, this is after. You can add a crop effect to your videos if you want them to look a little bit more cinematic. So add this right on top, go to Effect Controls, come down to Crop, then remove a percentage from the top and bottom. So 5% from the top, 5% from the bottom. And now this looks like a cinematic film. You can of course add to these if you want, but I will stick with 5%. Copy this effect, select it, Command C or Control C on Windows, go back to your other videos, and then just hit Command V. So now I have 3 cinematic looks that I achieved by 1. Darkening the video, 2. Making the video colder, and 3. Isolating the colder tones. If you take a look at the color wheel, the bottom half are cold tones, the top half are warm tones. So in the moody cinematic styles, we're trying to get rid of the warmer tones and just isolate the colder tones. Another tip is to use this style when you already have a lot of cold tones, such as a forest scene, any scene with water, or a blue sky. It also helps to have neutral elements in your video, so rocks, sand. These guys don't have that much color to them, so it's going to help make your colder elements pop out even more. So I hope you guys enjoyed these 3 examples, and I will see you in the next lesson.